Now we're going to go pretty, I want to say fast, but kind of dynamic. So the kidney is retroperitoneal. Come on, buddy. Retroperitoneal. Left kidney is higher. So what renal arteries, right? And renal veins drain away, originate from aorta, drain blood into the vena cava. Point of entrance is hilum. Vessels that drain urine, ureters, into the urinary bladder. Function of the urinary bladder: storage and expulsion. Urine leaves through the urethra. Urinary bladder is anterior to the rectum and anterior to the uterus. 3 layers of connective tissue: renal fascia, fat capsule, and fibrous capsule. Main anatomical layer: superficial is cortex, deep is medulla. Macroscopic structure elements of cortex are renal columns, in medulla, renal pyramids. Functions of the renal pyramids: produce urine, concentrated urine. Renal papilla, ends of the pyramids. Minor, major calyces, renal pelvises. I'm not going to write the explanations. That's basically anatomical. Route of the urine flow: pyramids, papilla, minor calyces, major calyces, pelvis, then ureters, and so on and so forth. That makes sense? So that answers this question. Nephron is the main functional unit. Main parts: glomerulus, distal, proximal, convoluted tubules, and nephron loop. Processes. Know which process. Glomerulus is only filtration. Okay, glomerulus is filtration. Proximal convoluted tubule, nephron loop, distal convoluted tubule, reabsorption and filtration. Reabsorption and secretion, I'm sorry. Pathway of filtrate: glomerulus, proximal convoluted tubule, nephron loop, distal convoluted tubule, collecting duct. 3 main steps: reabsorption, filtration, reabsorption, secretion. Filtration occurs in glomerulus. During filtration, water and small molecules go from blood into the filtrate. Reabsorption occurs in the tubular system. During reabsorption, water, ions, and other small molecules and nutrients return back to the blood from the filtrate. Secretion occurs in the tubular system. Here's typo, that should be secretion. It happens in the tubular system as well. And the drugs and some chemicals and ions go back from the blood into the filtrate again. 2 major types of nephrons: cortical and juxtamedullary. Main anatomical differences: cortical is in the cortex, juxtamedullary, its nephron loop is deep in the medulla. Cortical, electrolyte and acid-base balance. Juxtamedullary nephron, production of concentrated urine, regulation of the urine concentration. So that's basically nephron, general reabsorption, regulation of the electrolyte levels, and acid-base balance. Capillaries, peritubular. Juxtamedullary, production of the concentrated urine. Names of the capillaries, vasa recta. In glomerulus, you have glomerular capillaries and glomerular capsule. Blood is delivered by afferent arterioles and drained by efferent. Afferent are bigger, wider than efferent. The consequence of it, blood pressure is unusually high in the glomerulus compared to other capillary beds. Three pressures: hydrostatic capillary, hydrostatic capsular pressure, and osmotic capillary. Hydrostatic capillary drives fluid into filtrate. Osmotic capillary, hydrostatic capsular, back in the blood. Capsular osmotic pressure is 0 because there are no proteins. Net filtration pressure is, you don't need to know the number, it's 8, but you don't need to know the number. Drives fluid into capsule. When blood pressure increases, net filtration pressure increases. If concentration of albumin in the blood increases, net filtration pressure goes down, and vice versa. Pressure that changes is osmotic capillary. If albumin appears in the filtrate, net filtration pressure will increase, and that will, I don't know how to say, because there will be osmotic capsular will appear. Fenestrated capillary form glomeruli. Two distinctive features: fed and drained by arteries or arterioles, and high blood pressure. Podocytes, cells that surround glomerular capillaries. Filtration slits are formed by food processes. Proteins and larger cannot come through the filtration slits. GFR is the rate of the filtrate formation. Three factors that determine this: the thickness of the membrane, surface area of the filtration membrane, blood pressure. Thickness and surface area usually high. Blood pressure mostly defines net filtration pressure in GFR. Intrinsic control, control GFR. Extrinsic control, maintain blood pressure. Extrinsic controls override intrinsic controls in case of abnormally elevated or abnormally low blood pressure. So if blood pressure decreases, GFR decreases. When GFR decreases, filtration basically stops. Ion concentrations will be imbalanced. Two main mechanisms, myogenic and juxtaglomerular. Sensory stimulus, stretch of the afferent arteries. When GFR increases, afferent arterioles constrict, efferent arterioles dilate. When it decreases, opposite. Am I clear? That makes sense? So physiological outcomes: increased GFR goes down, decreased GFR goes up. Function of macula densa cell, sensing sodium chloride. Juxtaglomerular cells constrict or dilate afferent arterioles. Mesangial cells establish communication using gap junctions. So, GFR increases, flow rate increases, reabsorption time decreases, filtrate concentration of sodium chloride increases. Macula densa cells sense the changes in the concentration, communicate to granular cells, and diameter of afferent arteriole decreases. Afferent arteriole constricts. That decreases GFR, decreases the filtrate flow rate, increases reabsorption time, decreases sodium chloride concentration. So same story, decreased blood pressure, decreases GFR, decreased GFR, decreases the flow rate, decreased flow rate increases reabsorption time. This increases sodium chloride concentration in the filtrate. Macula densa cells will sense the change. They activate juxtaglomerular or granular, same thing. They release renin. Renin activates angiotensin, which activates aldosterone, which increases sodium retention. Main mechanisms for the extrinsic controls of renal regulation of blood pressure. Sympathetic system, renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system. It's basically what I want you to know. So, when BP drops, sympathetic responses are activated. Norepinephrine, epinephrine are released. Afferent arterioles constrict. Amount of urine formed goes down. Blood volume goes up, blood pressure goes up. So far. Know that I'm going pretty rapidly, but remember it's all getting recorded. Okay? So, sympathetic system, activation of sympathetic system leads to the release of renin. Renin activates angiotensin. Angiotensin activates aldosterone. Aldosterone increases sodium retention. That increases water retention. Blood volume goes up. Blood pressure goes up as the result. Main driving force behind reabsorption is the sodium diffusion. Sodium-potassium pump is located on the basal side. So sodium goes in the tube, the other way around. Sodium goes out into blood. Potassium ions go into the cells, tubular cells. Intracellular concentration of sodium compared to the filtrate, low. Sodium ions, due to that concentration difference, diffuse into cell. Reabsorption is driven by the low sodium concentration in the tubular cells. Water absorption in these kidneys is driven by osmosis. Driving force, sodium reabsorption. Other ions, reabsorbed via secondary active transport. Paracellular, between the cells, transcellular through the cell. Cellular structures, apical membrane, cellular cytoplasm, basal membrane, get in the blood vessel. Transcellular reabsorption, channels and transport proteins. That's all you need to know, like symporters and antiporters channels. In paracellular reabsorption, you can also transport via diffusion because there are no membranes on the way. Gradient necessary for paracellular reabsorption is formed due to, not sodium, water reabsorption. Transport maximum is the maximum ability, the maximum amount of chemical that can be transported across the tubular epithelium in a given time. When load exceeds transport maximum, reabsorption reaches transport maximum, and chemical is secreted. Physiological purpose of the secretion: get rid of wastes and regulate ion concentration. Aldosterone secretes potassium. Urea gets passively reabsorbed because of the water retention. So urea has to be secreted. Osmolality is the number of various particles in the solution. From superficial to deep medulla, osmolality increases. It is in the superficial medulla, same as in plasma. Juxtamedullary nephron is responsible for the regulation of the urine concentration. Countercurrent multiplier is the nephron loop, exchanger, vasa recta. Function of the countercurrent multiplier is to increase osmolality. The function of the exchanger to take away water and reabsorbed ions. Osmolality of the filtrate changes this way: 300, 1200, 100. So that's proximal convoluted tubule, distal convoluted tubule, that's nephron loop. Okay. Descending limb, water reabsorption. It is obligatory. Concentration of filtrate and its concentration goes up, filtrate volume goes down. Ascending limb, sodium chloride reabsorption. Osmolality goes down, volume goes a little bit down, just a tad. Okay. So osmolality and volume at the end of the nephron loop are lower than the same parameters at the beginning. Exchanger takes away reabsorbed water and ions. Blood volume, as it moves from the beginning to the end of vasa recta, increases. In the collecting duct, facultative water reabsorption. Aquaporins are the transport proteins for the water reabsorption. ADH regulates the amount of these proteins. It's a facultative process. Steps of the response to the plasma osmolality. So if you overhydrate it, ADH levels go down, right? Aquaporins go down, no reabsorption in the collecting duct. In dehydration, ADH levels go up, aquaporins go up, reabsorption in the collecting ducts. Urea maintains that's no reabsorption. Maintains medullary gradient. Urea concentration, so if that's medulla, that's superficial, that's deep. Urea concentration increases towards the deep medulla. Renal clearance is the ability to remove certain compound from the plasma. It is the GFR multiplied by the concentration of the chemical in the urine over its concentration in plasma. Now I'm not going to ask you to calculate anything. What do you need to know? Equal to GFR. Filtration. Less than GFR. Reabsorption. More than GFR. Secretion. Renal clearance equals 0. Complete reabsorption. Main pathways for water loss. Urination, breathing, feces, perspiration. Thirst is regulated by angiotensin and ADH. Okay? ADH and angiotensin. Renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system increases retention of sodium. Atrial natriuretic peptide responds to high sodium, leads to high blood pressure, leads to atrial natriuretic peptide production, sodium excretion. Okay, so therefore in renin retention. Renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system increases retention in response to low blood pressure. So, excessive sodium consumption. A lot of sodium drives water from the cells, increases, sodium increases, water is driven from the cells into the extracellular fluid, elevated blood volume, elevated blood pressure. Potassium level regulation is via direct excretion and aldosterone-mediated secretion. Potassium levels have to be tightly regulated because it may have detrimental effects on the cardiovascular system. Calcium reabsorption is regulated by parathyroid hormone. Three main buffer systems. So let's talk about this. Physiological role is pH maintenance. Bicarbonate system plays the most important role in extracellular fluid. Also ICF to a lesser extent. Mechanism. That's the reaction. If it's not enough acid, it will go this way. If it's too much acid, it will go this way. Phosphate buffer system, most important system in the urine, also intracellular fluid. The mechanism: same story. Too much acid this way, not enough acid this way. Protein buffer system. Most important one is blood, also ICF. So blood, urine, ECF. The mechanism: this, and amino group will buffer it into ammonia group. Acidosis is more common. Respiratory acidosis, impaired ventilation. Respiratory alkalosis, hyperventilation. Metabolic acidosis, alcohol consumption, diabetes. Liver failure. Metabolic alkalosis, extensive vomiting. Consumption of abnormally high amount of antacids. Hydrogen excretion in urine. Things that you need to remember: bicarbonate is not directly reabsorbed. This to interact and produce carbonic acid in the tubular cell. It dissociates into the hydrogen and bicarbonate. Bicarbonate goes into the blood. Hydrogen goes into filtrate. Hydrogen combines in the filtrate with bicarbonate ion, forming carbonic acid, which dissociates into carbon dioxide, which goes into the tubular cells and water. That's hydrogen balance. Carbon dioxide in respiratory acidosis increases. Kidneys will try to compensate, and in response to respiratory acidosis, more bicarbonate will be moved to the blood, so bicarbonate concentration will increase as well. In respiratory alkalosis, carbon dioxide goes down. Kidneys will compensate for it, leading to decreased amount of bicarbonate in the blood. In metabolic acidosis, bicarbonate ion goes down. Respiratory system attempts to compensate for it, and partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the blood will go down in response as well, because carbon dioxide will be breathed out. In metabolic alkalosis, bicarbonate goes up. Respiratory system compensates for it by not breathing hard enough. Carbon dioxide concentration in the blood will go up. 3 layers in the wall of ureters. Mucosa muscularis adventitia. Epithelium, transitional. Muscle tissue, smooth. Ureters lead to urinary bladder. Distal ends close as the pressure in the urinary bladder rises. Layers of the urinary bladder wall. Mucosa muscularis adventitia. Epithelium, transitional. Trigone, area between the opening of the urethra and ureters in the urinary bladder. Smooth muscle can be found in the muscularis of the urinary bladder. Male urethra is longer, so transitional is practically all the way from urinary bladder, and stratified squamous close to the urethral orifice. 2 sphincters control the release of urine. Sphincter, voluntary sphincter is outer, involuntary is inner. Internal is controlled by parasympathetic. External is controlled by somatic. Micturition reflex, stretch of the urinary bladder. Signal to the medulla. Medulla will send back the signals that will inhibit sympathetic system, stimulate parasympathetic, and internal urinary sphincter will relax, and then you voluntarily relax external urinary sphincter and you pee. That make sense? Now, sorry, I should have corrected it. It's not renal system, obviously. It's reproductive. So the first part is basically anatomy, reproductive organs inside the scrotum are testes, 2 muscles, dartus and cremaster. Physiological importance to maintain the temperature in the testis and allow proper maturation of the sperm. Cryptorchidism, when the testis failed to descend. Anatomical parts of penis. Root, shaft, glands. Circumcision, removal of the foreskin. Medical justification, reduced amount of sexually transmitted diseases. Internal structures that form penis. Corpora cavernosa and corpus spongiosum. During erection, they filled with blood. Anatomical path for sperm. Got a question today. Seminiferous tubules, straight tubules, ready testes, epididymis, vas deferens, ejaculatory duct, urethra. In seminiferous tubules, sperm cells mature. Sperm goes into the straight tubules, ready testes, and then epididymis, where sperm cells mature completely. After epididymis, it goes into the vas deferens. If vas deferens is ligated, that's vasectomy. 3 accessory glands: seminal, prostate, and bulbourethral. Fructose in the semen, energy, alkaline component. Neutralize acidic urine. Clotting factors. Clot the sperm upon the entrance into the vagina. Prostaglandins stimulate vaginal contractions to propel sperm towards uterus. Bulbourethral gland produces mucus that lubricates glans penis. Mechanism of the erection. Nitric oxide levels elevate, smooth muscle cells relax, that leads to vasodilation, that leads to engorgement of corpora cavernosa and corpus spongiosum with blood, leads to the erection. Erection response, parasympathetic. So we got this. Blood vessels dilate. Corpora cavernosa, corpus spongiosum expand. Mechanism of ejaculation. Smooth muscles that surround ejaculatory duct propel semen through ejaculatory duct. This branch that controls the ejaculation is sympathetic. Sphincter at the urinary bladder constricts to prevent sperm from going into the bladder. Spermatogonia develop into the sperm cells, and they are diploid. When they divide first time, they produce haploid daughter cells. Okay? And then primary no, I refer to different thing. I'm sorry. So spermatogonia produce diploid cells, 2 of them. That's the A and B, and one of them remains as a precursor. Another divides first time and produces haploid cell, which then undergoes second division, meiosis II, produces another haploid cell. 4 spermatozoa generated as the result of spermatogenesis. They all haploid. Sertoli cells direct the development of the sperm. They form sperm-blood barrier. It's important to prevent the immune reaction to the sperm. Leydig cells supply testosterone. Hypothalamic hormone that initiates spermatogenesis is GnRH. It stimulates follicle-stimulating and luteinizing hormones. Gonadotropins act on testes, and they stimulate production of testosterone. Androgen-binding protein binds testosterone. Androgen-binding protein is produced by Sertoli cells. The Leydig cells produce testosterone. 2 hormones, testosterone and inhibin, they establish negative feedback. Okay? Inhibin production is increased by the increased sperm counts. If hormones are not produced in the sufficient amounts, testes shrink. Testosterone increases metabolism, growth and development of reproductive system, oily skin and thicker skin, skeletal system, increased density, muscle growth, lowered voice. Main parts of female reproductive system, well, you can name them: ovaries, fallopian tubes, uterus, vagina. Function of ovaries: follicle maturation, fallopian tubes, transport, cilia are present in the epithelium of the fallopian tubes. Function of the uterus: implantation and development of the fetus. Function of the vagina: receiving sperm. Mucosa, stratified squamous epithelium. 2 layers in ovaries: cortex and medulla. In the cortex there is follicle stimulation, follicle maturation. In the medulla, blood vessels, nerves, and so on and so forth. Ovaries and fallopian tubes are not physically connected. If oocyte misses fallopian tube, it's dissolved. Ectopic pregnancy is pregnancy out of the uterus. It can happen in the fallopian tubes or pelvic cavity. Pelvic inflammatory disease is caused by sexually transmitted infections. It's basically bacterial infection of the pelvic cavity. 3 layers of endometrium: wall, perimetrium, myometrium, and endometrium. Myometrium, it's a muscle. Its function is to contract and relax. 2 layers of endometrium: stratum basalis and stratum functionalis. Stratum functionalis is where implantation occurs. Stratum basalis regenerates stratum functionalis. Labia majora, labia minora, scrotum. create vestibular glands, male homologs, vulvourethral glands, clitoris glands and prepuce. Homolog is penis, glans penis, and foreskin. Mammary glands, modified sweat glands. Lactiferous ducts convey milk to the nipple. Main source of cancer cells, epithelium of the ducts. Risk factors: early menses, late menopause, late or no pregnancies, no breastfeeding, genetics. Oogonium, diploid. When it divides, it produces primary oocyte. Primary oocyte is haploid. Primary oocyte does not complete meiosis 1. When it completes it every month. That's ovulation. When meiosis 1 is completed, secondary oocyte is formed. It's haploid as well. Along the secondary oocyte and primary oocyte, polar bodies are produced. Secondary oocyte does not complete meiosis 2. Stimulus for the completion is fertilization. It's the result, the egg or ovum that is fertilized is formed. How many oocytes, secondary oocytes, are produced? The result of the gamete development in females. 1. 3 polar bodies. During follicular stage of ovarian cycle, follicles formed. Luteal stage, corpus luteum is well developed and it produces hormones necessary for the implantation of fertilized ovum into the endometrium. Ovulation ready follicle, vesicular or antral follicle. It contains secondary oocyte. The remnant is corpus luteum. The function is producing progesterone or estrogen. GnRH initiates the cycle. It elevates the levels of FSH and LH. Gonadotropins stimulate ovary. Follicle grows in response to FSH. Luteinizing hormone stimulates follicular cells, leading to the release of estrogen. Estrogen inhibits luteinizing hormone. So this is now estrogen levels keep rising because follicle grows. Due to the size, it produces more estrogen. Feedback change from negative to positive feedback. So estrogen surges, that increases LH levels, that leads to ovulation. Progesterone and estrogen are produced by the corpus luteum. At this point, it's a negative feedback again that inhibits gonadotropins and GnRH. If secondary oocyte is not fertilized, corpus luteum degenerates, hormone levels go down. That change leads to increased GnRH production. Cycle starts over. So during ovarian cycle, gonadotropin levels are fairly low except for ovulation. Remember that it looks like this. Very roughly, both for FSH and LH. For estrogen, the levels will be like this, okay? So that's ovulation. For progesterone, the levels will be like this. Well, it's not exactly, progesterone should be shifted to the right. I just don't want to erase it, okay? That makes sense? Progesterone should be shifted. It should be a little higher like this. Menstrual phase. Menses happen. Okay, estrogen and progesterone levels are low at this phase. Mechanism for shedding. Blood vessels constrict, deprive stratum functionalis from blood, cells die, then blood vessels dilate, and blood rushes and washes away dead stratum functionalis. During proliferative phase, estrogen stimulates growth of stratum functionalis. So estrogen levels are high, progesterone levels are fairly low. During secretory phase, progesterone levels are pretty high. Okay, estrogen is fairly high, progesterone is really high during the secretory phase. If oocyte is not fertilized, levels of both hormones drop. If it's fertilized, they start to rise. Estrogen stimulates growth, it's anabolic hormone, stimulates breast development and subcutaneous fat deposition, widens hips, calcium is stored in the bones, blood cholesterol goes down. Fertilization anatomically occurs in the fallopian tubes. Acrosomal enzymes dissolve coronary radiata. When sperm enters oocyte, the cortical vesicles are released, and they completely ablate permeability of the membrane of the ovum. Physiological importance: so no other spermatozoa can enter the ovum. DNA of sperm cell and ovum mix, forming diploid cell. Fertilized egg is transported in the uterus by the movement of fluid and beating of cilia in the fallopian tubes. Blastocyst implants into the stratum functionalis in the uterus, and trophoblasts, they prepare stratum functionalis for the implantation and provide nutrients to the implanted blastocyst. Placenta takes over the transport of oxygen and nutrients from the trophoblasts. Maternal vessels that take blood to uterine arteries and veins. Structures that surround placental villi are sinuses. In the villi are maternal. In the villi, misread it, fetal blood vessels. So to the villi, blood is taken by umbilical arteries, from the villi by umbilical veins. CO2 from fetal blood goes into the mom's blood. pH in the fetal blood increases. So hemoglobin saturation in fetal blood goes down. Hemoglobin loads. CO2 from fetus decreases pH in the maternal blood. That increases unloading, and that is double Bohr effect. Fetal hemoglobin has the higher affinity to oxygen. Chronic gonadotropin blocks menstruation, stimulates endometrial growth, and maintains corpus luteum. Levels of progesterone. It increases the levels of progesterone and levels of estrogen. Effects of estrogen inside the uterus: increases breasts, increases genitalia, increases. These things grow. Progesterone maintains the healthy endometrium, decreases contractility of the uterus, and prepares breasts for the lactation. Chronic somatomammotropin, breast growth, increased glucose availability for fetus. Preeclampsia, due to the vast expansion of the blood volume, in the preeclampsia, blood pressure goes up, sodium and water retention go up, arterial contractility increases leading to the spasms, renal function decreases. Eclampsia is preeclampsia taken 10 times over. So it leads to toxemia, extremely high blood pressure, ablation of kidney function, toxemia, coma. Estrogen initiates contractions in the labor, positive feedback. Stretch of the brain freeze. Uterine cervix, stretch of the uterine cervix sends signal to the posterior pituitary, where, remember, oxytocin, which is hypothalamic hormone, okay, oxytocin stimulates further contractions stimulate more stretch, more oxytocin, more contractions until baby is born. Stimuli for milk production, suckling, hypothalamic factors that are released, prolactin release factors. Prolactin release factor and oxytocin. That prolactin release factor is from anterior pituitary, oxytocin is from posterior pituitary, are stimulated by prolactin release factors. Prolactin release factors affect prolactin increases milk production, oxytocin stimulates the ejection. So suckling increases oxytocin levels, and oxytocin stimulates the contraction of the smooth muscles, leading to the ejection of